CNBC senior Washington correspondent Eamon Javers. Eamon, we're already seeing the fallout from this hack.
A ransomware attack in Iowa, this time targeting new cooperative.
Hi, and welcome back to The Cyber Savvy Farmer. I'm your host, Dave Bedard. We're now on to part 3 of this special 4-part series on cybersecurity on the farm. Now, our first 2 episodes looked at ransomware and then at other damage that can be done to farms and agribusiness by remote third parties for their own skeezy purposes. Today, the question is why? We're going to talk about what some of these third parties and why they do what they do in cases where it's not just straight up profit motive. The more we talk about that, hopefully we learn to see more of the bad actors out there for what they are. Now, we hear a lot these days about manipulation and misinformation, and the level to which we're all connected online these days has made it easier to share that sort of bad faith information than ever before. The tactic has been around as long as people have been able to spread rumors and whispers, but for me personally, the effects on commercial agriculture started to become much more clear when my job first gave me a publicly available email address.
It's important to me that the consumers are told the truth about where their food comes from. We aren't trying to gloss anything. What we do, we're proud of what we do. We eat what we produce in this feedlot, and I wouldn't try and sell it to somebody else if I wouldn't eat it myself.
Now, that was cattle producer Bob Lowe in a video for McDonald's Canada, which during the 2010s had to mount a major counter-disinformation campaign to deal with a raft of old, new, and repurposed urban legends. Now, back in 2009, for example, there was a chain email that claimed to be from a real guy named Larry in southern Ontario, which in turn claimed that the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association had learned McDonald's was going to start importing South American beef to supply Canadian restaurants. So it turns out that email was a bad copy-paste job of an older American chain email and just swapped out Texas for Alberta, but the spread got so bad McDonald's Canada had to publicly refute this claim. So did the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association and the Texas Cattle Feeders Association, and even poor Larry in Ontario had to deny it because the Canadian version of the email included his real phone numbers. The end result is you've got people being misinformed in bulk about a major buyer of Canadian beef. Now, for grain and oilseed growers, remember that chain email that made the rounds for years claiming that canola oil was a poison that causes blindness and hair loss and other degenerative conditions in people and cattle? Well, the bulk of its claims can be easily ripped apart, but no matter. People still kept forwarding it to everyone in their email address book, and it doesn't take very deep searches today to find this thing still out there, copy-pasted on various websites today. Well, that's my rant. Our topic today is how misinformation is being used to undermine public trust, and how farmers and the public can best sort out the wheat from the chaff online. For this conversation, you'll be hearing Janos Bochner from the Community Safety Knowledge Alliance in Guelph, and Dave McMahon, an expert on cyber defense and intelligence and chair of the Cyber Council for the Canadian Association of Defense and Security Industries. Let's listen in. So we've been talking in these past couple of episodes about how these sorts of bad actors and bad faith operatives are getting into the ag sector and getting into farmers' hardware and software. Now, if we're going to focus on why these sorts of things are happening, you know, those old school emails I was just talking about are as good a place to start as any. Have we learned anything about the actors who were behind those sorts of things back then, and what they were hoping to accomplish, other than annoying a whole bunch of people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, motivation is part of the whole equation as to how we go about countering some of this. So part of the motivation is non-targeted. So you're just happen to be an IP device or an IP address and a device at the end of the internet, and something that's worthy of exploiting. So either to gain control to then further exploit something else, or you're just receiving some mass blast of phishing emails. And the target and the actor at that point doesn't really know who you are, what you're about. So it's very indiscriminate. And again, you're just, a victim that's perhaps out there. So doesn't pertain particularly to the ag sector, but the ag sector is not going to be immune from that sort of thing. So that's the vast majority of stuff that you're going to get. and some of it's going to be cleared out by just your ISP or your other providers, and one can take care of that through fairly basic sort of hygiene and security. The more insidious actor, of course, is one that's targeted, in which case they do care who you are and what you're about. And that's interesting. I mean, it can happen from a number of different reasons. One is they see the business you're in worthy of, let's say, a ransomware attack. They look at you and your business as something that is worth interfering with or disrupting, especially in the case of some nefarious sort of competitive industrial strategy or state-sponsored strategy. Or in the other extreme too is to the way of influencing that market and yourselves through, that could be very subtly through, stock market manipulation. It could be through innuendo, through disinformation, malinformation, misinformation, or propaganda. So we've sort of seen all those sorts of things. What makes it very interesting is that there isn't a straight alignment between a threat actor and a motivation. So, not like in the real world where you may have, a murderer commits murders and a thief steals stuff. In the cyber world, we tend to have actors that do many different things, especially these days where they're operating as proxies. So for hire, one day they could be running a ransomware campaign. The next day they're doing a disinformation campaign. The next day they're doing industrial espionage. And to make things a little more interesting is they all use the same tools. So if you're looking at, that's a type of tool, that's a type of malware that was used, well, it can be used by many different actors for many different things.
Further to that, the mix of motivations and whatnot that are out there. Has anything changed in the past 10 or 20 years or so? Now that we've moved on from email into the social sphere, into just straight up online misinformation, has anything changed in terms of the mix of players that are trying to misinform or manipulate information and to disrupt the sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's always been there. I mean, psychological operations, have been around for quite some time, and we've seen, social engineering for quite a while as well. What's changed, and perhaps probably in the last 5 years, is, and certainly after the growth of social media, but it was after, some very well-exposed disinformation and influence campaigns on the U.S. election, where a lot of the bad actors took note of how effective that was and how inexpensive it was. And so you got the development of things like troll farms and other sorts of things. And so the traditional sort of propaganda disinformation engines, which was pretty much print media and television, state-sponsored television, a lot of it moved over to the online world. At the same time, we got this effect where a lot of it's now being outsourced through these troll farms that are operated by proxy industrial agents of various states. There's just a whole lot of different individuals involved, individual companies involved, and actors. So you're getting it's pretty much a dense playing field where we have a embarrassment of riches in terms of density of targets and actors playing in this space. And of course now, we've labeled it the infodemic. In terms of one of the things I think about, and I've said in a while, is I think the war on truth is probably one of the greatest challenges of our lifetime. In this latter part of my lifetime, for sure.
And it doesn't have to work that often either to be considered a success, does it? I mean, if you've only got maybe just a small fraction of people who you're trying to reach who actually sort of take that next step forward, then considering the low cost of a lot of these tactics, it doesn't take much to consider it a successful operation, does it?
Yeah, I think one of the important things to understand when we think about cybersecurity is it's not just about protecting information and infrastructure. It's also protecting our capacity to understand the world, to know what's true, to know what's not true, and to relate to one another in ways that are effective and build social cohesion, as opposed to undermining our relationships and our institutions. So Dave has a really important point about the war on truth, or the infodemic, being a major challenge, if not the major challenge of our lifetimes as we sit here talking together.
I'm personally getting a sense out there of even more concerted efforts to to cast doubt on the credibility of legitimate information. For sure, I mean, we've been seeing a lot more flat out hostility and violence toward journalists, toward medicine, toward public servants. In some quarters, of course, that sort of hostility has always existed, but clearly it's being weaponized at a greater pace, isn't it?
It is, and Dave can speak to some of the specific techniques if that would be helpful. But certainly, what we know social media does, because it's based on, among other things, algorithms that continue to learn and to continue to optimize the things that are important to the platforms. And one of the most important things the platforms want to see is engagement, sticking with your platform and amplifying your presence on that platform to other people. And so how do you get that stickiness on the platforms? Well, one of the ways is to just like a slot machine, because some of the psychological research behind this is very, very similar, is getting people to feel connected and getting people to feel rewarded for hanging in there and interacting with the platform, and also to feel a little bit unsettled when they're not. So I haven't heard a ding for a while from my social media. I'm feeling a little bit edgy. I haven't heard anything. I haven't had a like from anybody in a while. And one of the ways that they increase that stickiness is to really make us feel a strong emotion. And so strong emotions are rewarded by the algorithms. And that makes the platform, and that makes you engage more with that stickier platform. And so what it ends up doing is it ends up really dialing up strong emotions at the expense of constructive dialogue, or maybe a little bit more nuanced conversation, and it drives things to the extreme. And therefore, it also drives people's thinking in some cases to extremes, rather than rewarding a little bit more tempered conversation, let's say, and careful deliberation.
Mm-hmm. It seems interesting that there's this whole, it's almost sort of a contradiction in terms. There's a very much a divide and conquer approach to misinformation, picking away at people's ability to maintain a community and work together. But at the same time, it also thrives on appealing to people's identities and to their communities in other respects.
Well, identities are really important to all of us. It's one of the most important things that you can leverage for good or for bad. We all want to have the identities that we consider to be the most important in our lives to be reinforced. And it's unsettling, to say the least, when those identities are in some way under assault or are crumbling. And stressful life events do that all the time. If we're bereaved, if there's been a job loss, if there's been a natural disaster, a sense of who we are in space and time and in relationship to other people is made a little bit more wobbly or a lot wobbly, and that creates a lot of stress. And we want to try and reduce that stress. We want to try and protect our identities or repair them if they get a little bit wobbly. So whenever we have opportunities to seek support for that identity, let's say in a community of individuals, whether that's an organization or you're affiliated with some other group, in the face of threats to who we think we are, we're going to gravitate to those groups, and we're going to want to stick to those groups, just like we stick to social media in some cases, because they reward and they protect the senses of ourselves that we consider to be really important. That can be helpful when everyone's rowing together in the same direction and grappling with a big challenge. But when it creates divisions and when it prevents dialogue across different perspectives, we get into trouble.
Mm-hmm. Dave, can you shed some light on any specific recent examples of where that sort of thing has happened?
Well, perhaps it's a bit of a. I mean, they're so widespread that, I mean, we see certainly the central stuff that's happening around us, everything coming out of Ukraine or out of Russia. I mean, Russia's taken sort of essentially full center stage in essentially spewing a fire hose of lies and disinformation. Now, not a lot of that has worked on Western audiences, so a lot of that is aimed internally at these audiences. Also, I mean, just recently today, China is playing up an accident involving Tesla. That was most notably and most probably a driver error. But that's a form of disinformation in terms of trying to erode the confidence in the product line within China. So that would be a very, one example I just heard today. The interesting thing about this sort of subject too is that, if you were one person with a bad idea, 20 years ago, I mean, you could only really spread that around the dinner party amongst your close friends. Now anyone can get millions of followers, and especially with the technology that exists now, one can amplify that message across multiple different platforms and have build up an organic following for these sorts of things. And folks like nation states like Russia and China, Russia in particular, likes to look where there's most areas of discontent and challenging situations online, and likes to just throw fuel to the fire. So they may not cause the fire, but they're certainly there stoking it.
Dave, can you? Are there any specific examples within the ag sector recently that you can shed some light on?
Well, I mean, I guess a couple. I mean, one is tainted meat, and calling the question the health safety of Canadian food. And folks like nation states like China were involved. Potash around tangentially to the ag sector, and quite often, these type of misinformation, disinformation, or propaganda or smear campaigns may also be happening concurrently with cyber attacks in the background, and being able to steal information from those systems and either for personal gain or for the gain of the state, but also used to essentially change the information ever so slightly and then release it in terms of breach information. So it's usually not just related to a disinformation campaign, especially if it's a state-sponsored activity. It's usually many other layers in the background, including people on the ground and traditional sort of propaganda interference activities.
To build on that a little bit in terms of the layered aspect, about a year before the 2016 U.S. presidential election, a disinformation campaign was perpetrated against, get this, a Pennsylvania turkey farm, and this was uncovered by the Wall Street Journal. The event was attributed to a source in Russia's Internet Research Agency. Now, why that's interesting in terms of layered exploits is that it appeared to be a test run of the way social media could be used to amplify and propagate mistrust ahead of the U.S. presidential election the following year. There are also examples of social media disinformation campaigns to create a scare about the use of herbicides and GMO crops in U.S. ag, and again that looked like it was. It had some connections to Russia-based organizations, but again, as Dave's saying, you can have these layered motivations that are being addressed by groups that are profit motivated, but they're making a profit for themselves. They may be dialing up an international trade position on behalf of their sponsor, or they may also be trying to condition another group of individuals to lose faith in a particular commodity that their geopolitical adversary is banking on. So there are a lot of examples out there, and they all involve, or in many cases they involve, these kinds of layered motivations, and in some cases layered techniques of both an influence operation and maybe something else as well from a data perspective.
Dave, you mentioned the tainted meat, basically the campaign out there to sort of spread fears about tainted meat. Was that related to the maple leaf the scare a few years ago, or is this a more recent example that we're talking about?
Oh, this is a few years ago. A few years ago. I mean, one of the interesting points that was just brought up was and I don't want to lose it, is, I mean, the ag sector, one may think, hey, why would we be on the crosshairs of anyone? Why would anyone care? And of course, there's direct answers to that. Like, there's a big trade negotiation. There's export of goods and services. There happens to be a trade war between two countries, and you're in the middle of it. The other 2 points that are really interesting is, one is a precursor to larger major attacks on hard targets. So quite often, nation states will pick a soft target to try things out on before they engage on something that they know is going to raise alarms. Because you attack a farm, no one's going to raise an alarm. They don't even know who to call. Let's see if that works. The other side is once the hard targets are prosecuted and become very hyper aware, the only one left is the soft targets to go after. So you get it at the beginning and you get it at the end of a larger campaign. And sometimes you get it directly. But just so that people don't think, hey, I can't see why anyone would be interested in me. I'm not really, much of a target from my perspective. You can be through, some other sort of proxy means or a means to an end to getting at something that they're very much interested in.
Mm-hmm. Now, I did also want to bring it back directly to the farm level. We did talk a bit in the previous episode about the potential theft of raw data from farmers. Is it? We've talked about this in the past, but I wanted to check in with both you gentlemen about this. Is it possible or even plausible that the sort of data that farmers have could be torqued or misrepresented or otherwise used against farmers in some way if an outside actor were able to get access to it?
Well, if you poison some data, in other words, if you fiddle with somebody's data stream and make it look like something's not happening when it is, let's say a disease outbreak, or make it look like something's happening when it isn't, like a disease outbreak, you can undermine trust in a particular commodity or in a region. You could undermine trust in a key element of a supply chain. And so those can have really serious consequences for all or part of a sector in Canadian ag or ag food. The other thing is, there's an old expression that, we're 3 days away from social unrest if our food supply chains get a little bit wobbly. So again, if you create a sense that things are very vulnerable or that things are unraveling, it creates a lot of anxiety, not just in our rural communities, but potentially across the country. And that can be part of, as Dave is suggesting, either a test run of something or a prelude to something else. It could be part of, positioning by a foreign state ahead of some really difficult international meetings that are seeking to maybe redefine some important relationships in the world. The last thing I think I would say there is the social cohesion of our communities is one of our biggest assets as a country. And if that social cohesion starts to get torn apart because influence operations are becoming more and more successful, we run into problems. We run into eroding trust in whether it's a supply chain or an institution or a government or any elected officials. And so, as Dave's suggesting, if you start with a soft target that people haven't been thinking about very much and really start to erode the way that communities can hang together, let's say in a rural context, you could make headway if you're an adversary of Canada in terms of undermining our sense of how we're able to get things done as a country. And that could be an important objective for one of our adversaries and a big problem for us as Canadians.
One of the things in terms of understanding, why actors do what they do and how it may take effect. Sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's not meant to be. For example, Russia in particular, may not have a targeted effect in mind when they spread disinformation, misinformation. A lot of cases, it's almost a nihilist sort of anarchist sort of viewpoint. They just, mess things up, just cause enough mayhem and mistrust in the system and mistrust in information that no one knows was true. And within that chaos, they see there may be opportunity that comes out. So that's part. And we've seen that over and over again, where we try to overanalyze why someone did something to then roll it back and find out how they did it and who did it. In some cases, it just was done in terms of just like this light thing's on fire, this thing that caused a dumpster fire, and then that will then flow into maybe civil disarrest, a disarrest that may have a knockoff impact in terms of the economy. It may have essentially, it just can't be good. We're not sure where it's going to go, and so sometimes we also give too much credit to things that happens when there's some sort of cascading failure of large complex systems involving people, process, technology, and things like that. That can happen because of a piece of mistruth. And we can sort of say, well, weren't they clever in how they orchestrated that whole sort of conception or inception operation? But in some cases, it just wasn't. It was more of a case of we're just going to drop, some toxic messaging in the pool and see, how it poisons the larger environment.
With that in mind, we're going to talk, of course, more about building resilience and finding solutions in our next episode. But how can we keep functioning as a society where these sorts of things are happening? I mean, surely there's got to be somewhere where an average person can stand between just on the one hand, just believing their friend or neighbor or that guy from Facebook that that he's got a credible source for that outrageous post that he just shared, or on the other hand, we can't really function either if we just assume that everyone's lying or being lied to.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I think we can come at it from three perspectives. One is, in fact, or actually four perspectives. The one being the victim themselves, and so how do we prevent from people to be victimized and taken by these scams? And part of that is education and awareness campaigns. Part of it, and certainly education within the school systems. It's also, how we may slow the system down in a way that they don't click on things and share things so quickly. So, for example, let's say someone's going to share something that is dubious, maybe, and we're seeing this more in social media platforms, and they say, you sure you want to share that? Like, have you read it first? And maybe that gives them pause to go and say, no, I shouldn't do that. Or labeling stuff. Hey, this comes from an untrusted source, or it's unverified, or fact checking it. So that could be, that's the type of things that we can address directly, towards mitigating, someone being victimized. The next thing is the message. So if we identify, messages online that are clearly not right, and we're seeing this messages being taken down, misinformation being bunked. In fact, we can do a lot of work in pre-bunking stuff as well by putting the truth out there faster than those that are putting misinformation or malinformation. So that's around looking at the messaging. Then we go to the other side environment, and that is the actors themselves. So what can we do to identify, name and shame the actors? So that, and start to take down and dismantle some of their disinformation networks. And that's something not an individual is going to do. That's something that civil society, industry, and governments do. And then there's stuff in the middle. So how do we construct an internet of the future that has this cognitive environment involved in social media that is going to be safe and be able to something that we can manage going forward. So essentially, those are the four sort of attack points. Now, we can address them all individually, and each one of those, if you take down any one of those, it's going to stop things from happening on that particular campaign. Or you can look at the whole ecosystem and try to coordinate an effort across that. And I think that's where governments sort of stand is, how do you coordinate an effort with other governments and other civil society and industry to make that, the internet's a bit of a safer place.
Okay, well, that's certainly given us a lot of food for thought and a lot of things to think about next time we're online. Dave, thank you, Dave McMahon and Janos Boschner. Thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're most welcome.
Great, thanks everyone.
You've been listening to our conversation with Dave McMahon, Chief Intelligence Officer with Sapper Labs Cyber Solutions in Ottawa and Chair of the Cyber Defense Council for the Canadian Association of Defense and Security Industries. Also on the call, Dr. Janos Boschner is a consultant on community safety and researcher with the Community Safety Knowledge Alliance, and he joined us from Guelph. For more information on the CSKA and its cybersecurity capacity in Canadian agriculture project, check out cskacanada.ca/projects. Well, now that we've talked about the what, who, and why in cybersecurity threats to you and your farm, on our fourth and final episode, we're going to talk about the how. That is, how people can protect themselves, their families, their farms, their data, and how, for all this discussion about high tech, a lot of the solutions and safeguards come down to us people. That's coming up in our final episode of The Cyber Savvy Farmer. Thanks for listening.